Welcome to Camera Raw Basics, created by Larry Mathewson. As you can see, I'm starting from Adobe Bridge. I right-click on the item I wish to load and go down to Open in Camera Raw. Now let's just take a look at some of the fantastic basics of Camera Raw. At the bottom of the page, it shows the size of the file, the number of meg. If we click on that setting, we can now change the basic profile to any of the available profiles in your computer, 8-bit or 16-bit. We can also head down to input sizing, which would automatically size your image to your selected size. And also, we can tell it to sharpen for screen or open in Photoshop as a 16-bit image. At the bottom, we can see the color palette, the size of the image in pixels, and the dot pitch. Now let's look at the left side film strip here. It has a save image option. If we load one or many images, we can select them after we've done our adjustments on the right hand side. We can go over and we can say where to save them, original file or another folder location. We can select what we want to name them, take the original file name, add 1, 2, 3 or more digits starting with 001. So you have a different numbering scheme. Use a file extension, either JPEG or PSD or digital negative. We can also tell the quality of the image that we wish to save, 12 being the highest. We can limit the file size. We can tell it what color palette to use. As when we loaded it in, we can change the color palette going out and choose 8-bit or 16-bit depending on the file type. Now, we can also resize them or save them as the original. Tell it not to enlarge if you're going down to a 1920 by 1080 and they happen to be larger than that already on the one side. We can tell it pixels per inch or centimeters per inch and the dot pitch. We can also sharpen it for screen display. Once you're certain that all your changes are the way you want, you just say save. In this case, I'm just going to close it, and it will save all of those images to that location with that setting. It helps a lot if you're doing many images. When your image is loaded into Camera Raw, it defaults to the zoom function. When you hold the left mouse button, go left, go right, it will enlarge or reduce the image. Also, down at the bottom left, you can use the controls shown there for sizing your image. This is also the commands used at the top on the left menu button. Control 0 will bring your image to fit in the screen. On the bottom right of the image, we can shift between before and after. Of course, we haven't done any changes yet to this image. In various left and right scenarios, or top and bottom, or back to the original. The right hand side of Camera Raw contains all of the necessary adjustments that you might use to change an image into a beautiful image. If you look at the very top, it shows your histogram, your focal length, your ISO, all your various settings. At each one of these segments of your histogram will show whether it's a dark setting, and you can left mouse button and slide left or right to improve your exposure, and it'll tell you which section you're adjusting. This is a very rough adjustment and may help when you're looking at the histogram, bringing it all in line. And the two triangles at the top, if they're black on the left and the right, that means you haven't blocked out the blacks or overexposed the whites. If we go down to the selections below, there are so many features to choose here. We can use color, we can use black and white, we can change to the settings within your camera. We can tell it to go on these presets that come with Camera Raw these days, whether they be black and white or color or artistic. I'm just showing you a number of options on a single click that will adjust all of your settings internally. And sometimes they work. My preference is I will do a manual setting because many of these might get you within the ballpark, but oftentimes aren't quite what you're looking for. Black and white will give you an idea what your image looks like in black and white, and also it has presets that you might choose to start with. I can look at a grid list or a grid with icons or just a list. Now that I'm back on the menu, I can choose as shot or automatic, and automatic sometimes works for you. Most of the time I find I have to do a custom setting, which means I will adjust the warmth or coolness of the image and many of the other features down below. Now let's have a look at the top menu. It defaults to the zoom menu, and that shows as a plus magnifying glass. If you left mouse click, move left or right, it increases the size or reduces the size, as I said before. Secondly, if you go to the hand tool and press the left mouse, you can move the image around the screen if you've lost touch with where you are on the screen. The third item at the top is the white balance selection. If you take the dropper to somewhere on the image, select something that's roughly 18% gray, you'll get a better white balance. And try different areas to try different combinations. The crop tool will allow you to select an area on the image that you wish to crop. If you decide it's not the right size, you can select a corner and readjust, or the top or the bottom, and pull the vertical or the horizontal end. It's ultimately adjustable any which way you'd like. If you go outside the image and click, it will disappear and you can try again. The one next to that gives you an automatic horizon correction, and it's done by drawing a line along what you believe to be the horizontal line on your image. When using the transforming tool, you can make many adjustments to the horizontal and vertical sides of your image, or allow it to automatically correct for images that are adjusted improperly. And experimenting is how you use this, by either doing it automatic or placing several lines drawn on your image to adjust horizontal and vertical lines, buildings that are out of square. And you can see on this one, of course, it distorts the image quite funny. Experimentation allows you to learn on this particular command. all the buttons on the top have a single keystroke to initiate them. You can show a grid here to correct your horizontal and verticals, and use an overlay or take the overlay off. It's very helpful if you're trying to determine if your image is square and horizontal or vertical. Spot correction tool is used just like in Photoshop, and it shows where your new selection is used to replace the old selection. And you can remove the overlay to see how it looks, or leave it in place. You can do multiple changes on this. You can also use a display to show where you might have dust spots on your image to remove them. And you just move the slider over until the light and dark will actually show the dust spots that you might have on the image. You can size your button, and you can feather it, and you can change the opacity. This works quite well, and I use it often for rough adjustments. I might use the healing tool in Photoshop again afterward if I've missed any of the adjustments. The healing brush also has a cloning capability, which we won't investigate here. It's a little more advanced to use. There's also a red eye reducing brush, which of course I don't have an opportunity to use in this example. The next three brushes or editing tools within Camera Raw give you the most powerful adjustments available. Each of these in its own way allows you to adjust all of the characteristics of exposure, contrast, white, dark, brightness, noise reduction, sharpness, amongst a number of other capabilities. You can show the mask, you can hide the mask, you can use these as an overlay and do multiple adjustments, either as a new article or adding another article or erasing. It offers a large amount of capability across the entire image. Also, recently, they've added the ability to adjust using luminosity and color as the adjustment tool. Experimentation in these three items is the only way to really know how powerful they are, because you can use the brush with feathering, you can add and subtract. Each in itself has different capabilities that are very advanced, and you can either use them simply the way it comes at first glance, or delve into the color and luminosity portions and really offer yourself huge capabilities for adjustment of an image. The Camera Raw Preferences tool offers a huge amount of help to establish the standards by which you wish to bring your images in to Camera Raw and how you want to handle Sidecar, which is an XML file, and it contains all of your adjustments. Each time you say done, it will save those on the side. It also tells how you can bring in your JPEG images, apply your basic settings, and in performance area, how the Camera Raw utilizes your video card. The last two tools at the top will allow you to rotate your image either left or right. Now that we've discussed the features of the tools at the top, let's go over to the right hand side of the Camera Raw and delve into the global settings capabilities for each of your images. At the top, we have the ability to warm up the image or cool it down with the yellow-blue temperature slider. Second, we can change the overall color format from more red to more green. We have the auto and default settings. Auto sometimes works and adjusts all the items below that are included in the top histogram. Each of these settings can be adjusted globally across the piece. Now, by holding down the Alt key and adjusting highlight, shadows, whites and darks, we can see which are blown out or which are blocked up. In the case of the blacks, you would adjust the slider and holding the Alt key until you see just a slight bit of display on a black screen. This is, however, not what you may wish to have as your final settings. So use it with tongue-in-cheek. As you can see, I have blacked out or blocked out darks, which I can adjust after the fact. Clarity and dehaze adjusts the mid-tone colors of an image globally. And I'm doing this by using the left mouse button, holding it down. Vibrance is a mid-tone adjustment for those colors that aren't adjusted globally with all the other features above and with the tint control. Each and every one of these sliders can be returned to its zero position independently by double-clicking on the control. You can also highlight over top of the name, exposure, for instance, and hold the left mouse button down and slide left or right to move the control. Or go into the numeric value and use the up-down arrows for a very finite adjustment. If we look at the next control, the tone curves, we're capable of adjusting by adding points for adjusting contrast and brightness, adjusting midpoints, highs and lows and darks. If you prefer doing your adjustments globally on a curve, this is an excellent way to do it. The next area of global adjustment is detail. It includes sharpening, contrast, detail, and masking in the upper portion. If we look at the settings and determine that we have sufficient detail in our original image, we can carry these quite far to the right. The idea is to increase the size of your image, adjust your 3 detail adjusters, and the best way to do this is by holding your Alt key down while adjusting these in a black and white mode. And by using the 3 together and not going too far to the right, you will be able to see the effects that these have on your image. Looking carefully, at your halo, which is established around the outside of an image, a skyline or what have you, if you carry these to extreme. If you hold the Alt key down while adjusting the masking to the right, you'll notice in black and white that the background pixelation is softened up while the foreground detail remains intact. Moving to the noise reduction area below, I use luminance sparingly up to about 25 while not touching the detail and contrast. This does soften your image the further to the right you go. In the case of the color adjustment, it adjusts the red, green, blue pixelation minutely as you go to the right and can be used quite far to the right. The detail will bring back some of the detail that has been removed when you soften up the red, green, blue dot pattern. And of course, if it is too detailed, you can smooth it out with the smoother at the very bottom. While adjusting these 10 sliders, which are very important, you may find you have to go back to some of the individual ones to readjust them to make them satisfactory overall. Each can be centered by double-clicking and moving it back to its center position. Moving on to the hue, saturation, and luminance settings. These are all global settings and would be a personal preference for color variance within the image. The next adjustment for highlights and shadows is split toning, which I have rarely used. I find I use Photoshop itself for most of those finite adjustments. The lens correction component here will allow you to apply a standard adjustment if it recognizes your camera and lens type. And there are many listed in this component, but sometimes if you bring in a JPEG, it won't recognize anything. So then you go to the manual setting to adjust the halos and purple and green that might appear around your colored image. The effects tool will allow you to add grain to an image or vignette, both white and dark. I generally use Photoshop itself for adding these features. Once I've completed all of my adjustments, I would go down and say done, at which point all the adjustments I've done to this image would be applied to the XML file that goes back to Bridge and appears on the upper right hand corner and shows cropping and what have you. If I were to open it back up in Camera Raw, I would see all those adjustments that I had done. Of course, if I didn't like what had been accomplished, I could have canceled anywhere along the way and it would have gone back to its original state. If I say open the object, I have several options using Alt key to bring it into Photoshop. It will go and make the adjustments in Bridge, which is the XML file, and then open the image with all of your settings in Photoshop. Depending on how you've told it to bring it into Photoshop, it will bring it in as a layer, either 8-bit, 16-bit, or as a smart object as shown in the box at the bottom right in Photoshop. We've now completed our basic Adobe Camera Raw tutorial and can now move on to basic Photoshop CC 2019 tutorial. Thank you for watching.